In my case, I realized that every time that I got angry, every time, it was because of a person issue. I was brought up to be very approval seeking. Somebody else shouldn't get hurt, make sure they're looked after. What will people think? Which is fine. But my epiphany was realizing that I am actually not approval seeking at all. Deep inside me, I actually don't care what people think. That's the person I am. And how did it manifest? And I realized this because every time that I would get angry or hurt or offended or fearful, it was this thing of what was somebody else thinking. Log kya kahenge? Right? So I would always get angry about, look, I've done so much for them and they haven't. Look, I'm feeling disrespected. Look, they stood me up. Every one of my issues that I got angry about or upset about or had stress about had to do with people, which led me to believe that this is a shadow. So your anger, your panic, your fear, become aware of it. That's step one. Then work backwards to figure out what that shadow is. How does it manifest?
This is episode number 98 of The Inspiring Talk with Eka Banerjee. Welcome guys to The Inspiring Talk. My name is Bijay Gautam. I'm your host for this show. Each week I interview today's most successful and inspiring personalities to help you realize your inner potential. Dear listener, as you know, we are soon hitting 100 episodes of the Inspiring Talk podcast, and I would love to hear from you. I invite you to share your personal transformation story. If this show in any way has helped you in your journey or inspired you to do something inspiring, I would love to share your story with other listeners. You can record your voice message by visiting theinspiringtalk.com/SPEAK. I might feature your message in upcoming episodes of the show. I'll wait for your message. Now, on today's episode, I'm very excited to be joined by Eka Banerjee. She's one of the India's leading women CEOs, coach, and expert mythologist. She's also co-author of the best-selling book 52 Red Pills. Eka is an executive coach who have designed her coaching methods based on ancient wisdom, history, mythology, and literature. She explores her purpose at Ekam Resonance, where she, along with her community of researchers, delve into ancient wisdom to solve modern humanity issues. On this episode, I invited Eka to share her insights based on ancient wisdom to build our emotional strength and resilience. We discuss how you can manage your emotions, how to deal with anger, how to reprogram your subconscious programming, and a lot more. By the end of this episode, you will not only hear Eka share her insights, but also you will walk back with tools and hacks that you can implement in your life to become a better version of yourself starting today itself. Without further ado, let me welcome Eka Banerjee. Welcome guys inside yet another episode of the Inspiring Talk podcast, and I'm really excited to have with me here Eka. Eka, thank you so much for joining. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bijay. It's absolutely a pleasure being here on Inspiring Talk, and what a wonderful platform you have and the kind of themes you cover. I've been following Inspiring Talks for a while now and very, very impressive. So really, thank you so much for having me over.
Thank you, Eka. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And I had your husband, Siddharth, and a lot of people enjoyed the episode that we had on hyper learning, and you were equally part of that journey. But today we are here to talk a little bit about the different topic. Obviously, your contribution to the book was obviously from the mythological perspective, but today, we are here to talk about the emotions and how do you build your emotional strength and resilience. And, with the lockdown, we have seen so many people going with the emotional turmoil, like, a lot of ups and downs and stuff that's happening. So I thought, it would be a great time for us to talk about how can we take control of our emotions, right? So largely, this is what we're going to talk about. And before we really jump in and, start getting your insights, I would like to start by talking about, you as a teenager, right? So you said you discovered that you were a healer at the age of 13. How does one discover, who they are at the age of 13?
At the age of 13, Vijay, no discovery is an easy discovery for sure. So it's interesting because I remember when I was a teenager, and I could see things that others couldn't, or hear things that others couldn't, and I didn't know they couldn't. In my worldview, this is exactly how the world was, right? So if you saw somebody, you're hearing them talk good stuff, but what you're seeing is really the anger that is seething within, or the jealousy that is seething within, or the pain they're going through in terms of their own identity. And I didn't know that others around me couldn't see it, right? So I would turn around and say, why are you hurting so much? And that conversation is happening about a party we need to go to, or some friends we need to do. And they're just looking at me and wondering, where did that come from? So it wasn't a very pleasant journey for sure. I think somewhere we also don't equip our children to embrace what they see or what they hear. We also don't equip them with their own unique narrative to say that, whatever you're seeing is your truth. We're always raised with this whole thing of there is one truth, there's one narrative, there's one journey, there is one formula for success. And especially in our times, the whole formula for success was become an engineer, become a doctor, become, do your MBA, become a lawyer. And those narratives were so narrow that I don't think we allow ourselves the luxury of seeing something unique. So that discovery was a very painful discovery. And because remember, all your peer group and everybody around you was going through their own private journeys as well, and denying those journeys and sticking to the narrative. So it wasn't an easy journey. And then at that point of time, Vijay, somewhere I feel that when you're a teenager and an adolescent, there are already so many issues you're dealing with, like identity, hormones, love, first love, crush, infatuation, career, academics, just the whole discovery of the person you're becoming versus the child you were. That with all of that, you don't also want to deal with feeling different. So well, and that's how I discovered that and there were little things, right? When I was in college, I remember there used to be people who would walk into my room in the middle of the night, right? So a friend of mine would walk in at 2:30 and 3 in the morning saying, Ki, Eka, I'm not being able to sleep. Can you just put me to bed? And all she would need is to lie down and sort of me just lulling her to sleep. Somebody else would call in saying that, I'm hurting very terribly. Can you just hold me? And I'd be like, sure. And, because I was so busy being in denial and being angry and being resentful, I also didn't want people to find that out. So yeah, that's what the journey was about, discovering that one could heal. One saw threads, relationships between people. So you could walk into a room full of 100 people and know exactly who were the two that were connected to each other. You can see it. It's like how we see the world. You see a glass of water, I can see the potted plant behind you, I can see those yellow flowers, I can probably see a little more than that as well. Now, of course, I've learned the difference between what's tangible and what's not, but then I didn't know it.
Okay, so on that itself, right, I want to, the reason of that denial obviously was, one of the things was this probably, and I'm assuming that was the pre-programming that you were running, which was that I need to be an engineer or a doctor or whatever, right? So I need to follow a certain career path, or maybe because you were different. Why do you think now, when you look back today, like, why do you think was that denial, or was it because that was not an accepted norm?
So I'm going to answer this I'm going to respond to that in two parts. One part of it was my journey. The other part of it was what in hindsight I've discovered is that stage of adolescence. And a large part of what I'm saying, Vijay, will be also the foundation for the rest of our conversation, which is this sense of identity, right? So if I ask you, Vijay, who are you? What's the answer I'll get? So who's Bijay? If Bijay had to tell me who Bijay was, or if a third person had to tell me who Bijay was, what's the answer I would get?
So I think that's the question that I'm pondering a lot myself nowadays. But one of the things, like I mean, again, like I'm probably trying to avoid that question. But one of the things that that one of the artists whom I have interviewed on the show, and that kind of resonated with me. Also, now he is featured on the Netflix series as well. So he said, you know what, we all are the stories, or we all are trying to create the stories that and because we all are stories, then try and leave the best story that you can tell. So I think when think about myself as well, so I think that kind of resonates to me, that I am probably someone who's just trying to be best of myself, and probably, I mean, be of service as much as I can. So I don't know, I mean, how to really answer that question.
But you realize that even for that, Bijay, for somebody like you who's been on this quest for the longest time, this is a difficult answer. If I normally ask somebody about who they are, the answer I'm likely to get is right about the jobs they hold, the responsibilities they have, the positions they occupy, the school they study in, or what they're doing, right? And I think here's where a lot of my angst, and honestly all adolescent angst, emerges from, which is that when we are younger, say about 9, 10, 11, 12-ish kinds, as children, our identities are a function of what we do. So, they're defined by what we do. So if you do your brush at night, you're a good boy. If you finish your homework on time, you're a good boy. If you go down to play, you'll be a good boy. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So our identities are about what we do. Somewhere from our adolescence right up to our adult lives, our identities become a function, Vijay, of what we do or what we have, right? From what we do to what we have. Now, whether it's the job you have, the family you have, the educational qualifications you have, the building you have, the flat you live in, the cars you have, so everything becomes a definition. Our identities are a function of the roles and responsibilities and the possessions we have, material and non-material. But think about it. Is that who we really are? So if I strip you of what you do and what you have, then is your identity of who you are and who you be. What you spoke about, Bijay, your story, that's when it starts emerging, right? Now, it's very interesting about how this journey transcends, right? So when we are children, we are all outside in. Whatever we are told,
That's correct.
we reflect that, and that's our identity. That's who we are. There's no self, there's no ego that emerges. Somewhere in the process of adolescence is that, that person who's me starts emerging. So the identity starts emerging. That's what adolescence is. When that identity starts emerging to say, what do I like? What are my passions? What can I see? Who I am? Why I am? What do I want to do with life? Who do I love? Why do I do what I do? All of that starts emerging somewhere in your adolescence. Right? But while this is emerging, our external world doesn't go away. So that external world, and frankly, as parents, and I understand this now because of being parent to two adolescent girls, my older one's 18, the younger one's 14, and you realize that the outside world doesn't go away, right? So what you're doing, get security, get financial security, do well in your academics, take sciences, do law, this, that, and the other. What will the world think? Log kya kahenge? So what will people think? What you wearing? That noise doesn't go away. So while in your adolescence, you're still dealing with who you are and this new beast and this new creature and this new person that's emerging of you, the outside world doesn't go away, right? So, and it's very interesting. While we say that you become an adult at 18, actually it's not at 18 that you become an adult. This process continues. This process of churning and discovery and this adolescenting process actually continues till you're 25. And that's a specific biological event. At 25, your pineal gland matures and gets set, right? So in fact, which is why, if you remember, all our ancient scriptures have brahmacharya, or the student age, or the first stage of life till you're 25, right? So this journey that continues to happen till you're 25, at 25, this concrete of your identity and the outside world coming in gets settled and fixed. The fears and insecurities that get frozen then hold you back for the rest of your life. And all our life we then spend in just living out whatever that mold that got created at 25 was, right? So and while that's been the discovery in hindsight, I do realize that what was happening with me at that point of time was this conflict of the person that I'm emerging versus peer pressure, versus how I'm being judged, versus the need for identity, security, financial security, academic security. And I think that conflict, in that conflict, at that point of time, the outside world won. And I think that led to, so I blocked myself out, because that was the most teenage way to deal with this, was to block yourself out. And how do you block yourself out? You block yourself out because there's obviously something in you that's dying to come out, that's like bursting to become you. And then you very deliberately cap it. And you cap it by engaging with the outside world. So that was the life where, one became this very loud, rowdy teenager, and I would pick up battles and go outside and spoil for a fight and prove a point to the rest of the world. Oh, you could challenge me into anything. I would do anything to prove a point to the world. Yeah. Everything became about, taking on the world, and it's a fight and it's a battle, and I'm the rebel without a cause, and I am going to show to you what I am made of, and all of that. All of which was basically generating outside noise. Because if that noise went away, then you would have to face your own silence. And that you were not ready for. It's so much easier to live the external narrative. So yeah, that was the journey that started then. I blocked myself out. I stopped having conversations with myself. And because I did all of that, that was the time where I lived the world's narrative. So went ahead and did economics, hated every single day of economics, wanted to actually study science. But it wasn't cool to study science, right? So if you didn't become an engineer or didn't crack IIT, then who studies science? You don't do a BSc in physics, even if that's what every iota of your being wanted to do. So you did economics. From economics, you did an MBA because it was the easiest shortcut to success, much easier than the alternative of finding out who you really are. The alternative to living the worldly narrative is finding what your narrative is. And Vijay, like we were talking about, what you've done with your podcast and with Inspiring Talks is exactly that. I mean, I have tremendous respect for your embrace of your own self. So I think that's a journey that went on. One did an MBA, one took a job in the banking world, even though the only thing that during my MBA, I thought, let me join the FMCG world. But guess what? I had no offers from any FMCG company, and I was the only one on campus with offers from all the 4 banks. So you went and became a banker. It was very cool, right? So all this was very cool. Economics honors was cool. MBA was cool. Becoming a banker was very cool. And so on and so forth. Thankfully, there were moments of sanity where one fell in love and one got married.
Yeah.
Those are moments of...
Yeah. So I'll come to that. So, before we proceed there, one of the things that you shared, which is, I think, very deep, even for the people who are listening to this, not only for the teenagers. I come across so many people, not only teenagers, but adult, right? And I'm sure you do the same as well. You come across so many people who are, all they are trying to do in the life is to just get carried away with the outer narrative. And the only reason to chase the outer narrative and just do that is because if they stop doing that, then they have the inner demons, you may like to call, or the things that, that you are trying to be is gonna now, trouble you. And that's why, you just are constantly doing that and you are too afraid to face that, right? So we'll come to the adults later on. But now, Eka, I'm sure you have seen this with your daughters as well, and you have like teenage daughters, right? So can you remember any particular conversation that you have had with your daughters where, you are, trying to tell them that it's okay to face the inner narrative or something and then just shut the outer, this chatter and the noise and then just go in, just acknowledge it and then just, I'm sure it's not an easy one, but if you can remember any of those conversations for the listeners, who are particularly the young listeners.
So it's actually a journey, Pata Vijay. Even as the person who operates in this space and does life coaching and does senior corporate executive, teaches the rest of the world to embrace themselves. The role as a mother is not easy. The temptation to step in and say, I know what's right and you don't know what's good for you.
Yeah,
is very, very strong. And so, and in fact, I must admit I am actually very grateful to the girls for allowing me the opportunity to face and challenge my own notions of being a mother by my own self, right? I realized, Vijay, what was happening. So Oishi is now 18 and Tavishi is now 14. So about 5-6 years ago when Oishi was stepping into, 12 and 13, and I know it all, and that dealing with her own self, the temptation to be the classic mother, to be the best mother, because your child is doing wrong. You want to open them out to a conversation. It was a hard choice, and I must tell you about a little incident and it's a very constant conversation, but it sort of set the grounding principle in the house, right? So the elder one came in. I think she was about 14, 15 when she came and said, I want a tattoo, right? Now, it's a very standard 15-year-old request. The mother in me is immediately tempted to say, no, you will not get one right now. But the adult in me then says, but why? Matlab, what's the reason? What's my discomfort with a tattoo? So we had this very interesting conversation in the house where the ground rule is that, and I explained to them the same logic, till you're 25 and till you mature, and etc., etc. And I said, so the rule is that you can't take a permanent decision till you're 25. So anything that's not undoable, you can't do till you're 25. Only you can do things that are undoable. So is a tattoo undoable? No, it is not. So tattoo happens after 25. And by the way, obviously we have like a serious discussion, dispute and debate and argument to that, because I want a tattoo. And I'm saying, no, not till you're 25. Okay. But till then, and we were laughing about it because she was saying how a friend of hers has this tattoo on her wrist of her date of birth. And she was only laughing with me about it. She said, like, it's like she gets up in the morning and she wants to be reminded of her date of birth. So I said, see, that's exactly what happens with teenage tattoos, right? So, no, but I will take a sensible call because obviously, I know it all. After 25. And then when this conversation went on further, it was very interesting, Vijay. She said, can I dye my hair? Can I color my hair? And so again, the principle applied. Is it undoable? Of course it's undoable. The hair will grow back again. No big deal. There's no permanence of that decision. So he said, yes, you can. Of course, she's not dyed it yet, but now I'm okay with it. It doesn't matter, right? The principle it established was about the doability and the undoability. So why was I opposing tattoos? Now, part of it was because of being the mother, but I think when you dig deeper, you realize that it's actually because, you can't undo it. It's a decision you'll regret later. Dyeing your hair is not a decision you will regret. You can undo it. And so we actually went ahead and had a further conversation around it. Anything that's undoable versus what's doable. You want to go out, drinking one night and do a party, that's all right. It's completely undoable. No long-term consequences. Of course, you will wake up feeling miserable. The next day, you will probably have broken some friendships, probably have done some stupid things that you regret for the next 3 days, but nothing more than that. However, and think about it, posting something on the internet, for instance, it's not undoable. And these children realize it much better. So that principle got established that a teenage pregnancy is undoable, is not undoable, right? It has longer term consequences. That, and they were laughing about it. She said, Mom, how can you equate getting a tattoo to a teenage pregnancy? I said, but same scale, no? It's not about scale, it's about the first principle. So the first principle is doability and undoability. End of story. So, yeah, and we have plenty of such arguments, debates, conversations around the house all the time, including last.
So I think that's a I think that's a very, really interesting, way to look at things. And I'm sure if there are people who are parents listening to this, I think that's a really good filter to use, right? To what to allow to, because a lot of the times, parents are not well educated, in saying yes or no to the kids, because they themselves don't know whether, what is going to be the impact of this. But just using this filter of saying that, is it doable and is it undoable? It's easier for the parents as well to say to their kids that, what?
The larger philosophy, Vijay, is not about the filter you apply. The larger philosophy is about us trying desperately to be parents. So we hold ourselves not to the tattoo or the party or the, pigsty cupboards. That's not what we are holding ourselves to. As adults, we are holding ourselves to the notion of what an ideal parent should be. You remember when we were children, we used to write these essays, right? Ideal teacher, ideal student, ideal leader, all of that. And later on, when we're talking about emotional resilience and embracing your own emotions, this will become a very important part of that discussion to say, what am I supposed to be, right? So till I'm holding on to the notion of what an ideal mother should be, I will live by external notions. Then I'm a screaming banshee, because in my mind, an ideal mother must ensure that their children have their dinner by 7:30. An ideal mother must ensure that children brush their teeth on time. An ideal mother must ensure that all homework is done, right? And therefore I become this wailing banshee mother around the house, because I'm trying so desperately to be an ideal mother. Whereas actually, if I get rid of the fact that I'm a mother, then that conversation is a person to person conversation. Then I can tell my daughter that dekho aisa hai, if you don't brush your teeth, my teeth aren't getting spoiled, your teeth will get spoiled. If you don't eat your vegetables, my tummy will not hurt. If you don't do your homework, I will not be left illiterate, or I will not get humiliated in school. So suddenly then I allow them their identity. I allow them their existence. I allow them to think and reason. And I remember when I was yelling at my daughter, telling her that, no, actually now I don't yell. Because then, now that I'm not trying to be the mother, then I can goof off, right? Then I can dance maniacally to a nuclear which is playing. Because mothers may or may not dance. I enjoy that dance. I can goof off. I can sleep off on the armchair or the sofa. And that's acceptable. I'm accepting myself more than them accepting me. So I remember the younger one once telling me, not now, I mean, she was 7 or something. And I was telling her, I said, go brush your teeth, look at your teeth, otherwise I'll take you to the dentist. But I'm a child. I said, so? I started laughing. She said, no, but it's your job as a parent to make sure I brush my teeth. I looked at her and said, if you have that much of sense to tell me what a parent's job is, why don't you just go brush your teeth at that time? And suddenly it's okay, right? So we hold ourselves to the notion of who we are as parents. If we let that go, then only you can arrive at the operating principle. So in my household, the operating principle may be about the undoability. But in my parents' household, it was very different. I remember my mother telling me, and it was very interesting. My mother telling me about the consequence, about the action consequence principle. My mother never used any concept of right or wrong with me. So the only principle she used was that, beta, whenever you're doing something, close your eyes and think once whether this act, this person, this job, this decision that you're taking is worth it. And that was her principle. Right. So, but we need to allow ourselves to arrive at our principles and not hold on to a notion of how the world must be.
So this brings me to another interesting, thought that just crossed my mind, which is about this whole idea about being perfect, right? Like you mentioned about being perfect mother, right? And then letting it go, right? I don't have to be a perfect mother. And then, and then the whole thing changes, right? Even in the career or whatever we do in our life, right? So this perfect thing, like I need to be ideal, like whatever, ideal father, ideal husband, ideal boyfriend, ideal whatever that is, right? So that is so much ingrained in that. So who defines what is ideal?
I'll actually take a step back from that, Vijay. Where does our need to hold on to an ideal come from? And that's step 2. The first step is acknowledging that we are outside our control. And every time that we operate outside of ourselves, we are going to be the victim of an external world. What that means is, and this concept is brilliantly explained by the concept of the kshetra in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Which is about saying what is within my control and what is outside my control. So circle, and the West calls it brilliantly as the circle of control and circle of concern. Whenever I operate from my circle of concern rather than circle of control, I will have panic, I will have stress, I will have anger, I will have fear, I will have insecurity, right? I'll take a very small, actually anger always. When was the last time you got angry? What did you get angry with? What was the last occasion that you remember getting angry?
Wow. So okay, I mean, there's a really interesting thing about the, my own anger journey, which I'll share later on, but don't have like that big kind of a burst kind of a thing. I don't do that anymore. But those are like a shorter kind of a thing I might have gotten, last week or so where I might have shouted a little bit, but that, that kind of lasts for like a couple of seconds. So yeah, I mean, maybe it's something with my sister. So
yeah, but what was it that made you angry? Something she didn't do?
Yeah, maybe the way I wanted or something on that.
Right. So
yeah.
your anger originated because it was something it wasn't about you at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't about within your control. It was because it was outside your control. So
That's correct.
anger, fear, panic, depression, sadness, hopelessness, all of it emerges when you operate from circle of concern, not control. It emerges from a state of helplessness. Right? So the classic parental anger with the child also operates because you know that the child is going to get hurt. And your helplessness as the parent out of sheer love, but that helplessness as a parent to know that you can't control the fact that your child is going to get hurt. It is their hurt, it is their life, they will get hurt, but it's your helplessness that leads to anger. Or let's take the current context of the pandemic, corona. Okay, there is one big virus called corona all around the world, and I am in panic, and I am in fear, and I'm scared, and I'm terrified, and I'm angry that my world has been curtailed, etc., etc. All of that is space of concern. You can do nothing about it. The only thing that you can do is come back into your circle of control by saying, what is it that I can do about it? So all that I can do about it is make sure I wear my mask, my house is closed, I'm eating healthy, hygienic food, I'm washing my hands, I'm drinking my hot water with pepper, haldi, whatever else I'm having it with, and then letting go, right? So the origin, and that's why I said the first step is the origin of stress, of anger, of fear, of panic. And we will come back to discuss this further. But now that we've established what the pathology of anger is, where does it originate from? The next level is, how does it express itself? How do I diffuse it for myself? So one part is, of course, that you get angry or you live in fear or you live in panic. But the other part of it is that we then construct these notions of how the world must be versus how it really is. So you got angry with your sister because she didn't do something, or something wasn't the way you thought it must be. It has nothing to do with her.
Yeah.
You expressed it on her because in your mind, you think she is the one who must do this thing. And that's from where the notions of the ideal come. So there are two spaces from where the notion of the ideal comes. One is when we live, or when we peg ourselves, when we anchor ourselves to something outside of us in our circle of concern for how the world must be, should be, supposed to be. Yahi satya hai. This is the truth and the absolute truth. This is right. This is wrong. This is good. This is bad. All of these are spaces where we anchor ourselves so that we don't have to take control or charge of it. So that's one space where the concept of the ideal comes from. But the other is even more interesting, the concept of the ideal that is the best of us. So the concept of our own personal heroes. Right? What usually happens is that instead of living or discovering or exploring our own narrative of what do I want to do, who's my ideal, why are they my ideal, how do I want my world to be, how do I want me to be, because for that I will have to take responsibility. It's much easier to shift to an outside narrative of, like I said, how a mother must be, how a leader must be, how a brother must be, how the house must be, how the dishes must be, how the toys must be arranged, or how the books must be arranged. It's just much easier. And that's why we have this concept, so that it allows us to anchor ourselves not within us, but an excuse to be outside. It's like how Eka was anchored in this concept of, the cool corporate czar, because that was an easier narrative. And what I was running away from was actually discovering who I was, why I was, what I really wanted to be, because that needs my own responsibility and accountability. Then there's no concept of cool. No? There is no point to prove to anyone else. There's no external narrative. So the reason a lot of times we have these notions of the ideal role, the ideal responsibility, the ideal house, the ideal level of cleanliness, the ideal academic behavior, anything, is because we're avoiding that conversation with ourselves. Because otherwise you'll have to go in. Do hi jagah hai. You can either be inside or outside. You can choose whether you want to be inside or outside. And those are the only choices.
So take us there and talk about the time point in your life, right? Almost for the 20 years, you kept running away from that inner conversation yourselves. And there could be no better person than you to, actually talk about this, because you kept running away for 20 years. And then, life slaps you saying that now it's time to have the conversation, have that one. I think that's the first slap, and then probably you were yet to get it 100%. Then life slaps you with yet another one, right? So maybe you can talk more about what are the incidents that I'm trying to refer to for the better understanding of the audience. But then share with us then how exactly you went about starting to have those inner conversation with yourself.
So here's the deep dark secret, right? So when Siddharth and I got married, and we got married really, really early. We finished our MBA when we were both 22. At 23, we were married. At 24,
Wow.
we were parents. And if you saw our life from the outside, it was very, very similar, right? But I must tell you about him, and I think I've learned a lot from him in this journey. So we were both science students, class 12, because you only took sciences when we were younger. Siddharth's the father wanted him to join the army. Siddharth didn't want to join the army, so he went. He took the NDA exam, came back, got his Air Force letter, showed it to his father to say, "Look, I can do it, but I don't want to join the army. I want to be in the corporate world." Okay. Here was I wanting to do engineering, took the exams, didn't crack IIT. So didn't crack IIT money. Either you should have had that passion enough to sit down, dedicate yourself to it, or do science instead. But no, it wasn't cool to not be in IIT. So what's the next coolest thing to do? Economics honors. So both of us did economics honors, Delhi University, right? So same public school. He was Lamart near Lucknow. I was Welham Girls, Dehradun. Then we went to Delhi University, economics honors. His reason for eco was because he wanted to join the corporate world. My reason for eco was because it was the coolest thing to do. Both of us hated every single day of economics. Then we did our MBAs. He did his MBA because he wanted to join the corporate world. I did my MBA because it was the coolest thing to do and got you a great job and got you some money, right? So MBA ho gaya. After the MBA, he was first day, first slot FMCG company. I got my first day, first slot banking company. He only wanted to join the FMCG company. Siddharth was very clear about that he wanted to do marketing in the corporate world in the best FMCG company in the country, right? So for his summers, he didn't get placed there. He tried again for his finals. He didn't get placed there. In his first job after campus, he tried again. He didn't get that job. It was from his second job outside of campus that he finally got the job he wanted, right? Whereas I wanted to join FMCG, got banking. Again, banking was very cool. First day, first slot, very cool, fancy foreign bank you got. So you picked that up. Now think about it. When you looked at our lives from the outside, they were identical, right? So public school education, sciences background, economics honors, Delhi University, MBA from a premier B school, and fancy corporate jobs at the best corporates in the country. And yet, there was one of us who was deeply unhappy from within, and one of us who was very happy, right? The one who was happy was actually doing well, rising, getting his promotions, and just being happy, enjoying his space. The one who was deeply unhappy was sitting there, blaming the system, and by the way, because education and everything else was common, level of wealth was common. So therefore, the only thing I had to hold on to was gender. There is gender discrimination and, the world is bad and the industry is bad and they have favoritism. All of it. It had nothing to do with the industry. It had to do with the excuses in my mind that I was trying to make for my own unhappiness, because I wasn't embracing myself, because I was constantly living the external narrative. 20 years is a long time to live in that. So I did about a decade and a half of banking. And I was a good banker. Vijay, and I must confess, I was actually a good banker. But that I realized is that I would be a decently good anything because I'm a hard worker. It doesn't have to do with banking, right? And I had my usual promotions that one gets in banking of, your what I call the Hindu rate of growth promotions in the corporate world, where you were climbing the ladder, but being very unhappy. Right. And then two things happened. The first one was about me embracing the healer self, which is when our second daughter was born and we had serious medical issues with her. And we didn't know whether she would live or die for the first 6 months. And I think that's the first time that jolt happened. And I felt miserable. I felt miserable because I, not as the mother, but as the healer, because I was supposed to have been able to heal her, work with her. But because I'd been so busy whining, running away from myself, denying myself, that I couldn't do what mattered most then. And this was 2006. Um, in 2008, we moved to Singapore. That's when I took up my first entrepreneurial venture. And then, like you said, what going to Singapore did was allowed me that space to at least start asking the questions. Right. Suddenly, for the first time in my life, I was even asking those questions of why I wasn't embracing myself, but still didn't do anything about it. And then, like you said, it's almost like Bhagwanji gives you one tight slap to say, don't you get it? So then I had a very, very nasty road accident when I was in Singapore, 2010. I think that is when the tip over happened, because suddenly it wasn't about healing anybody else, but it was actually about healing myself. And the first step of embracing myself was to embrace my healing self. So then I spent the next 6 months embracing myself, going back to everything that was important, the yoga, the meditation, the healing needed to come back. And like we said, no, I've lost the right for life, Vijay, to say to anyone that I have done so much for you. Look, you haven't done for me, which is classically how we live the world. Look at so much I'm doing. You don't do anything for me. I've lost the right in life to say that to anyone. For the amount of love that I received, for the amount of healing that I received, just for my gratitude to the universe. That was the first 6 months. Then we shifted back to India. I spent the next 6 months, literally, as they say, paying off all my social and emotional debts. Went back to the mountains, which is where I came from. And that's where I actually derive my energy from. Went back to old schools, parents, school teachers, friends, just for closure, just to say that, look, I mean, I'm sorry if I've behaved badly all these years. I love that Jain concept, no, of Vichami Dukdam, where, I love that idea of saying that I'm sorry and I apologize for all the grief and harm I may have ever caused. But know that you're important to me. My parents, in-laws, everybody. So that was that phase. And I think the last thing that was left was my corporate nirvana. I hadn't reached that stage of, I can't work in a corporate house even one more day. So when did my last corporate job there. And then, Vijay, somewhere in 2012, and I still remember that day vividly, was that day where I resigned from my last job. And it was this feeling of absolute empty. That was the day of the rebirth, where there was no desire, there was nothing left inside me. I didn't owe a thing to anybody, nobody owed me a thing. I think that's from where the second life began. And like I told you, right now I'm on my third life, because there was also another rebirth that happened. So the first life was 20 years, 13 to 33, of anger, of denial, of resentment, of not liking oneself. The second life was 2012 to about 2018, which was that life of embracing yourself, why you are, who you are, what you want to do, loving yourself, accepting yourself. I think that was a life where I found my purpose, my passion, my mythology, my ancient wisdom. That is the answer to all our solutions, reaching within ourselves. I re-educated myself. All of that happened. And I think about 2 years ago, when I was in Oxford, that's when I've stepped into my third life. And it's this gorgeous life where you just step into yourself. There are no fears, no insecurities. There's only a very clear, conscious purpose where you just be. There is no expectation. There is no, it's just about living in the here and the now while you do what you set out to do. Yeah, that's
awesome.
Not a long answer to a short question.
Yeah, so it's a constant discovery and rediscovery, right? And I think that's the journey for all of us, and for the listeners who are listening to us, and based on your experience, right? So, and I'm sure you do believe that anyone can live this life that the third life that you are referring to, which is living, number one, with the self-love and being in complete love and acceptance of who you are, the way you are, and then living without the fear and pursuing the things that you love, right? And all of us, like most of us, let's say, most of us know what is it. And it's again, it goes back to the fact that, it's just that we don't have enough courage to maybe take those decisions, or maybe the understanding of the life. In fact, like, I don't have to do this if I don't love this anymore, or, there is something else that I can tap into and, take this leap. But still, there is something that stops a lot of people, right? So how do you think that people can even begin on that journey, like let's say who are just leaving the way life throws at them, but how can one take that control and say that what, I want to now start making changes? Like, where does one begin on this journey?
So it's a 3-step process, but that process must begin from you. So there's nobody else who can take that decision for you. There's nobody else who will tell you when it's time. That burning desire to change your life or that burning desire to embrace yourself must come from within you. That's step 1. Now the question is, how does it happen? Right? So like I said, there are the first step, and we spoke about it, is stepping from your circle of concern to circle of control. How do you do that? You do that by becoming aware of everything that makes you angry, everything that makes you sad. Every time that you are angry or sad or depressed or offended or hurt or panicking or scared, any one of those, step into it, because that will lead to a shadow. That will lead to something that you are expressing, but that's not yours. That's within you, but that's not yours. And I'll give you an example. In my case, I realized that every time that I got angry, every time. So people have different reasons for being angry. I realized that every time I got angry, it was because of a person issue. Right? So I realized that in my childhood and adolescence, and there was no harm in it, right? That's how our parents bring us up. I was brought up to be very approval seeking. Somebody else shouldn't get hurt, make sure they're looked after. What will people think? Think about them, be considerate, be kind, which is fine. But my epiphany was realizing that I am actually not approval seeking at all. Deep inside me, I actually don't care what people think. That's the person I am. And how did it manifest? And I realized this because every time that I would get angry or hurt or offended or fearful, it was this thing of what was somebody else thinking. Log kya kahenge? Right? So I would always get angry about, look, I've done so much for them and they haven't. Look, I'm feeling disrespected. Look, they stood me up. Look, I don't think they love me enough. And so I didn't have financial issues or competition or achievement issues. Every one of my issues that I got angry about or upset about or had stress about had to do with people, which led me to believe that this is a shadow. So your anger, your panic, your fear, become aware of it. That's step 1. Then work backwards to figure out what that shadow is. How does it manifest? So the second step is the manifestation of that. And this comes back to what you were talking about, Vijay, the sense of how the world should be. We hide ourselves or our shadows behind a sense of supposed to be, must be, aisa hi hona chahiye, this is the truth, this is how life must be done, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. And watch yourself every time that you use these words. Every time that you use any of these words, or hold yourself to, how a mother must behave, how a brother must be, how a husband must be. But this is a wife's job. But the husband must do this. But this is how children must behave. Every time that you come across this, it is because you're anchoring yourself in your shadow outside. So this first step is becoming aware of what causes you stress, anger, panic, fear, uncertainty, whatever it is. The second step is watching yourself to the notions you're anchoring in, because those need to be let go. So the second step is letting go of the notions you're anchoring yourself on, because till you're holding yourself there, you can't slip in. You're anchored outside. So that's the second step. And the third step, and this is by far the easiest sounding but the most difficult to do step, is the step of neuroplasticity. Is the step of creating the alternate pathway. Right. I'll go back to the second step and give you a chota sa example of how it plays out. Right. Do you know how to swim?
No.
Okay. But if you're in a pool and there's a ball at the other end of the pool, How will you get that ball? You want that ball. How will you get that ball?
So yeah, I mean, you want to go maybe calmer because the more effort that you put then in, the farther the ball is gonna
The
go.
more you chase the ball, the further the ball goes away. And the moment
Yep.
you're, and you know, we've been raised to believe that keep your eyes on the ball. Whereas actually you need to keep your eyes and your center of attention to your own strokes. So you calmly swim towards the ball. And actually when you're close to the ball, you stop, you pause, you wait for the ball to come to you. Right? And this, by the way, is in this gorgeous concept of the Bhagavad Gita, the concept of the karma. So, karmanye vadikaraste, ma phaleshu kadachana. We like to believe that it's this fancy notion of saying that detach yourself from the result and everything will come to you. Yes, it is, but at its most basic level, it is about action and consequence. It's about and by the way, action doesn't happen just in physical action. Action initiates at the level of thought, at the level of intention,
Absolutely.
at the level of idea. It will have a consequence. Just there are only actions and consequences. There's no concept of right or wrong. The moment we embrace that, and in order to embrace that, you will just have to watch your actions. So the first step is the why, the circle of control and circle of concern. The second step is which is the concept of the kshetra. The second is the notion of what you're hooking yourself onto. Releasing that to living in the present, the here and the now, and not how the world should be, but what it is. So it's like if you got irritated because that vase was not kept at the top of that table. Now, why were you irritated about that? Because that's the place of the vase. The vase must be kept on the top of the bookshelf on the right corner. The moment you've used the word must, break down that question into saying, says who? I mean, what happens if that vase moves to the center? Why are you holding on to the notion of that vase being kept on the right hand side corner? And Bhagwan ji ne likh ke bheja tha. Did you get one God ordained advice saying that the vase must be kept there only? Right? So that's a notion we hold on ourselves to. The notion of the ideal mother saying that the ideal mother must ensure that the children brush their teeth at night. Why? The children need to brush. No, the mother doesn't need to brush their teeth. So if you have a rule for yourself, which is circle of control, which is saying, I must brush my teeth at 7:30 every night. That's fine. That's within your control. And that won't make you angry. If you don't brush your teeth at 7:30 every night, that won't make you angry. But the moment you step out of your control into concern, that no, my sister, you must brush your teeth at 7:30 every night. You've lost control because you're holding also to your notion outside of you. And therefore, to shift that focus from the outside to the inside, there's this fabulous practice called neuroplasticity. Basically, our mind is a binary device. It can either think in zeros and ones. It doesn't understand the concept of undoing something, of losing something. You know, it's like, Bijay, if I was to tell you right now, Bijay, do anything, but don't think of langur monkeys. Do anything but don't think of monkeys. Guess what's on your mind?
Yeah, the monkeys.
All shapes and sizes and color. That's because the brain doesn't understand the word no. It doesn't understand. There's only 0 and 1. Either something is present or it's not present. That's it. So every time you say, I'm not going to get angry. I am not going to get angry. I am not going to get angry. The brain is only hearing angry, 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 angry. Right. So similarly, when you have to make that shift, which is create the alternate neural pathway, you need to start thinking of the positive affirmations. So typically when we deal with people who have anger issues, you don't tell them don't get angry. You tell them create the alternate cycle. So start breathing, start counting, start drinking water. You remember Chak De? Have you seen Chak De?
Yep.
So in Chak De, there is that girl from Chandigarh who gets very angry and her mother says, Beta, tu gussa thuk de, drink water. Because the brain can only do one thing at a time. So you have to snap that pathology of anger, stress, fear, panic, uncertainty, whatever it is, irritation, you have to snap that and replace it quickly with an alternative, because the world doesn't have the concept of a vacuum. You remember when we were kids, we used to hear this wonderful shloka from the Brihada Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It said, Asato ma satkamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. You don't take away darkness. And you don't enter a dark room and say, I'm going to take away darkness. You just introduce light. You don't focus on the darkness. You just introduce light. You don't say, I'm not going to lie. I am not going to lie. You simply replace it with the truth. And that's the practice of coming back into yourself, embracing the yes, setting up alternate neural pathways. So you don't, are you a vegetarian or are you a non-vegetarian, Vijay?
I am a vegetarian, but not like a.
But you're not a
I
strict
mean, I'm trying.
vegetarian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not as strict. Yeah. Not as strict. Not as strict. Yeah.
So think about it, right? Let's think about somebody who is a non-vegetarian and is trying to leave non-veg food.
Yeah.
Okay, that person goes to a party, and at that party there's like really good non-vegetarian food on the table.
Yeah.
That man spends his entire evening at the party battling with that non-veg food. Battling with that food to say, I'm not going to have you. Look at that food standing there and tempting me. No, but I'm going to resist, right? Whereas if you're actually a vegetarian, you know that non-veg food doesn't even register.
Yeah.
That
That's correct.
is neuroplasticity. When you don't spend your life hating non-vegetarian food, but it doesn't even register very sahaj, very gracefully. So the concept of anger is only not there. The concept of competition is only not there. The concept of the ideal notion is only not there. How an ideal mother should be or a brother should be, or how that vase should be kept on the right hand corner is not there, right? So you let go of the notions of the world, how it's supposed to be, and then you find that you automatically shift into control. Right. And I'll again give you this very chota sa example. But we have this couple in our building that my parents are very fond of. And they live on the 20th floor. We live on the 27th floor. And my parents, they have a daughter who my parents think should be friends with my daughter, etc., etc. They're very fond of them. So there's this day where I was entering the elevator and this couple was already there. So I got in and I said, "Arey, how nice." So and this is pre-COVID era, so there were no masks. So I looked at them. I said, "Arey, how nice to see you." And my parents speak really highly of you, and really wonderful daughter you have, and my parents just adore you. Now, what would your reaction to that be? If somebody tells you this, walks into an elevator, and says this about you, what would you say?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you just acknowledge that.
Thank you. It's so nice of you. And, she's also a wonderful person. Your parents are nice.
Yeah.
That's it, right?
Yeah.
So she turned around and she looked at me. She said, "Why are you jealous?" And I just looked at her. I said, "Sorry, should I be?" And tab tak, the 20th floor came, they left, and I came back home. My mother was at home, right? So I got in and I told my mother, I said, this conversation happened. So my mother's my mother. So she turned around. She said, "You're being judgmental." I said, no, I'm not being judgmental. But their thinking that I'm jealous doesn't make me jealous. But it tells me the mind space they are operating from. Nothing else. It tells me that this notion of, the concept of jealousy, they have something, we don't have something, that notion existed. Right? And that's that third step, which is replacing the negative with the alternative. The most powerful way that I found to do this, Vijay, and it really is simple but so difficult to do, which is to not use negative words. And it kills you, especially as a parent and a parent of adolescent children, it kills you. When at 3 o'clock in the morning, they want to wake you up and say, "Can I have ice cream?"
Yeah.
So, but
amazing.
that is the way you step out.
Yeah.
And that's the way it's a simple thing. It sounds very unrelated. It sounds very uncomplicated, but really it's the simple things that really, really, really matter, which is just being open and not using negative words. Eventually you find that, so 3 things happen with that. One is that by not using a negative word, you, because the moment you've said a no, not, cannot, must, supposed to, right, wrong, you have paused your brain from thinking further. Right? So that's the first thing that you've done. So you've snapped the cycle and the pathology of anger and fear and panic and irritation from kicking in. So the moment you've snapped that pathology, that's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is that you force yourself to think of the alternative. So you're forcing yourself to say, this sense of saying that the vase being kept on the right hand corner. The moment you're challenged or you force yourself, then you're asking yourself, why? Matlab, can there be something else? Can it be kept in the center? Can it be kept on another table? That's when you open yourself up to thinking of the alternative. That's the second thing that's important that happens. And the third thing, which is actually an indirect consequence but very powerful, is that to the other person, or the person the concept you're corresponding with, you're seeing the other aspect and increasing your own respect. And slowly, exactly like building a muscle at a gym, this becomes repeated behavior, iterative behavior, slowly translates into the way you think and eventually becomes you. So this, and that's exactly what happened with me, by the way, where I just stopped saying a no. Because I stopped saying a no, I was able to say, "Acha, let me study mythology, let me study neurosciences, let me figure out anthropology." Where am I hunting for the answers for? Can I do this? And there was, because there was no notion of, a corporate CEO must do this.
Mm.
It allowed me to do anything. No? It's okay for a banker
Yeah.
to then become a student, for a student to
Yeah.
then become an entrepreneur. And Vijay, I've seen that validation where I realized that for the 12 years that I was actually chasing the corporate world, my next promotion, my next level, would I have made to the CEO of any bank? Possibly not. But when I actually embraced who I was and did only what I wanted to do, karmanne vadhikaraste, I actually, within 2 years of that, I actually made the first CEO of my batch, whether man or woman. And that's because I wasn't chasing that CEO position. That CEO position was just, it was literally a nimitta matra, via medium to the impact I wanted to create, or so stop defining my identity with what I was doing or what I had. And that's how the shift happens. That's how emotional resilience happens. With more practice comes greater resilience.
I think those are like really practical tips for a lot of people listening to this podcast, and whether that's about the circle of control versus circle of concern, or whether that where you mention about dealing with your kids and something that's undoable or not. And I think that's also really a good filter to probably use. And also, the things about awareness. And like with me, right? Growing up again as a teenager, like I was extremely angry teenager. I would get like extremely angry to the extent that at one point, right, I was so angry that my sister was on the bicycle, and I intentionally, like, I rolled the bicycle and she ended up having her hand fracture, right? So that was the extent of anger that I had growing up. And then, again, as you said, like the first step, which was about awareness. So I started becoming more when I started getting into self-help and started reading books and so on and so forth. And then I started being aware of the instances where I was being angry. And just that one simple thing about, oh, okay, what I'm feeling right now is anger. Or, I mean, even if you don't notice, like when you are at that, like just after feeling angry, then just realize, oh, I again, felt angry, and why I was being angry, right? And in the past 3 years or 3-4 years, like as I was saying earlier, like I don't really get angry as much as I used to do, and it has dropped down to an extent like where I'm extremely calm right now, and that emotion is not to the extent that it does any harm to me anymore, right? And another thing that has helped me extremely in this is meditation, which also you talk a lot about, right? So I have been on and off meditator for the past 3 years, but for the past 2 months, I have never missed a single day. Like I meditate every single day. And as a result of that, one of the things that you mentioned, which is getting more clarity of the thoughts, right? It helps me in getting more and more clear with my thoughts. And my stress level, oh my God, it has gone like to almost like nil now. I'm more calm and composed, and I see with more clarity. And one thing that I never thought that meditation would help me do is the self-love and acceptance. Now, when I'm constantly looking at myself and, just observing inside, I realize that I started accepting me more than what I used to do, and not have any judgment for myself. And in fact, we have done a detailed episode. The episode just before yours was a detailed episode on the meditation, and how can people get really into meditation, and breaking some of the myths that you need to go to the Himalayas and sit on the side of the river to meditate, and so on and so forth.
That would be perfect.
That would be ideal, but you don't really need to be in that place to do the meditation, right? So these are the things that has really helped me cope up with these kind of negative emotions for me, right? So are there anything else that you'd like to share to the people on how can they actually, as we also call it, right? So how can you really take control of these emotions and not let them control you? As and I particularly love this. So another funny thing that I love doing, not with everyone, but especially with my sister, and maybe lack of better way of teaching her the consequences of anger, I would constantly poke her and then get her angry, and then tell her, you know what, you see, you are now again getting angry, and this is not having me, this is having you, right? So and I always tell her, like, you know what, I have the remote of your emotions, right? I always tell her, like, you know what, I have the remote of your emotions and you don't have mine. So, take this back, take this control back to you, right? So, are there any things that you'd like to share which we haven't already discussed so far for the people where they can be in control of the emotions and not get provoked by the outer circumstances? I know that you have shared ton already on that.
So here's a couple of my thoughts, and you're right. It's a journey. It's actually a forever journey, Vijay. What I found working very well for me, for those around me, and for all of us is something that operates at three levels: the level of self, so of me, our nearest and dearest ones, because that's where we are most emotionally hinged, attached, and therefore will face greatest disturbance from. So, of me, of mine, and of mankind, by and large, how people are reacting, what politicians are doing, and what superstars are doing, and their lives. I find it very useful to, and like you said, meditation, of course, is a brilliant practice of grounding. And like I always say, even if you can't meditate and find a serious dhyana space, even just sitting in silence is more than enough. It grounds you. It clears out your electromagnetic field, and it's extremely empowering. Just sitting in silence, and there's no religious aspect to it, but just the chant Om. So if you find that when you're sitting in silence, you get distracted, thoughts come in your way, and you're very tempted to engage with those thoughts. Thoughts will come. Of course, they're allowed to come. You don't have to engage with them. You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to argue with them. And the moment you find that happening, bring yourself back. So focus at the center of your forehead. Imagine a nice, pretty flame there. And just the audio chanting, the chanting of Om, Om, slowly brings you back into yourself. I find that very useful. The other practice that I find very useful, and this is across the house, all of us do this very diligently, is one thing a day for me, one thing a day for mine, without any expectations, without any, look how much I'm doing for you, but one thing a day for me, unconditional. So one thing a day for me, one thing a day for mine, and one thing a day for mankind. Right. So, and these could be very little things. I'll give you an
give
example.
Us some examples so that audience have.
So for me today, for instance, I decide that I'm going to do 21 Surya Namaskars. That's for me. My happiness, my health, being good, kind, and loving to myself. One thing. For mine, I decide that I'm going to bake a cake. Now, never mind that they don't even eat it. It's fine. I'm doing it for them. That's my bit of saying that this is for you. Now, if you don't say thank you, if you don't eat it, if you don't cut it, if you don't like it, it doesn't matter. This is me for you. End of story. Or I will clear out your cupboard. The fact that it might actually end up leading to some serious battles on the cupboard is different, but that's my way of contributing to your life. So me, mine, and then the third space is mankind. So I might get up and do a little act of charity, which is donate a pair of old shoes to a maid. Something as little as that. Or I could get up and create a content video, which is my gift to the world. So the SIPs, which you've actually seen on the Ekam Resonance page, are actually just my gift to the world. There's no expectation. There's no other intention besides just saying that, look, we need it right now. The first lot was about saying we are dealing with physical immunity and the impact of the virus. So here are some things on building our physical immunity. The second lot was exactly what you're talking about, that we've reached a stage where there's no end in sight, where there's a sense of emotional despair and hopelessness coming in, where we are losing our sense of identity because there's no concept of space and time left. Therefore, the second series was actually about ESIPs, building emotional strength and resilience. There is no intention behind it beyond that. And very soon, in fact, next week onwards is where I'll launch what's called the ISIPs, which is actually about investing in your own self, becoming the best version of yourself. 14 days simple practices. So that's mankind. So every single day, just doing, and of the three, it's very important to know what you're doing for you. For me, embracing me, allowing me to be. Because otherwise we will lose the narrative. Otherwise we will become victims of saying that the world caught up and my work caught up and I had Zoom calls and I had, I don't get time for myself and my family also wants time. The question is, what are you doing? So one little thing for me, one little thing for mine, Now that mind may be something as simple as, your spouse asked you to fix a light bulb that you haven't done. Right? So one little thing for me, one little thing for mine, and one little thing for mankind every single day. Right? So that's something that I believe in deeply, and that's the other thing. The practice of the yes, Bijay, it sounds simple, but it is by far the most powerful, most incredible thing that you'll do for yourself. In fact, Siddharth would have spoken about this in the hyper learning journey as well, of saying of how we really needed to pull out time because we were so deeply passionate about it. And because Siddharth's the one who's about organization and discipline and rigor, he organized it into a learning practice and the book and therefore the weekly discipline. But it emanated from that dying, that bursting, that burning desire within us to learn, that desire to connect back to each other as a couple. Siddharth would have mentioned that. The fact that there are two senior corporate people in the house, parents, households, families, children, everything is being managed. This allowed us to connect back to that which is most basic and most primitive to our relationship, which is what we do best alone, individually, and what we do best together. We fell in love over learning. So for us to rediscover our love also needed to happen over learning. There are couples who will do it over traveling, connect back with their mind over traveling, over dancing, over cooking. But find those rituals for the me, the mine, and the mankind. So, and that's what I would really say. And of course, like I said, the practice of the yes, it is unbeatable. It's a very simple thing, but it completely changes the way you look at the world. It completely changes the way you think. It completely changes the way the world perceives you. Imagine when your staff or when your employee walks up to you saying, I need leave, expecting the answer to be a no. But because you won't use the no, and you write back saying that, is it really necessary? Are you sure you can do it? Okay, how can we manage your work elsewhere? Because when you can't say a no, you're forced to think of alternatives. You're forced to deal with respect. And suddenly the whole world changes. They are very little things, Bijay, but unbelievably powerful. They bring you back into control. You don't operate from the circle of concern, but from control. They help you let go of notions, of suppositions, of ideality that you've been hinging yourself on. And they create those alternate pathways that when you let go of those notions, what do you step into? So
beautiful, Eka. Sorry. Now I finally managed to mess your name up. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. And in fact, this is also what we're doing at Ekam. So this is exactly what Ekam is about. It's about harnessing ancient wisdom to solve contemporary human problems, right? Human challenges.
Yeah.
And we've realized that all these answers exist, whether it's about your physical world, physical body, whether it's about your emotional body, whether it's about your intellectual body, whether it's about your spiritual body, they already know the answers. And it's just so much easier and so much more sensible to, sit in silence, dig deep, go within your roots and find out who you really are deep within, and allow that to come forth, because you can only be the best version of your own self. Everybody else is taken.
Awesome. Beautiful. So I think those are like really practical, insightful, ideas for people to actually not only listen and get inspired, but go back and actually take action and do something about the information that, people have heard here. I'm sure a lot of people realize that there's so much insights and wisdom that Eka has got to share with you all. So I would recommend that you guys go ahead and check her Instagram. I'll link that up on the description, where she shares these different 14 days, different kind of challenges. So she comes with one new challenge every single day for you to take up for the 14-day challenges that she already has done 2 different challenges, and she's coming up with more, as in the future. So make sure that you join her on Instagram. And to add to, the thing about, and I love this idea about me, mine, and to the universe, right? I mean, to the world, right? So I think that's also another brilliant concept. So I'm going to do that. So again, like during this lockdown, one particular practice that I started doing, I wish I could be more regular on that, but instead of just writing those heartless happy birthday or happy anniversary to the people like everyone else does on the Facebook post, I thought, can I take a little extra effort in making that more special for them, and I started recording videos and then just started sending, video messages to those birthday. Otherwise, I won't wish. Like if I don't feel like wishing anyone, then there's no point just me just going and putting out and putting that heartless, happy birthday or whatever that is, right? So I started recording videos to people, and the way people responded back with that and the joy, just saying that, what, this is the best birthday wish that I have received. Or somebody, just had their first daughter, and I just recorded video saying that, hey, congratulations on having your daughter. I'm really, glad for you guys. And just, sharing those words, like, and that really, while it feels like I was doing it for them, but I realized it was something that I was even doing for myself, for my own happiness, because by contributing to someone else's happiness, you are cultivating your own happiness. So I think that's another practice that you guys can do if we are looking at one more practical thing that you want to implement in your life. Just record that video, or maybe just record that voice message, but customize that, make that special day more special, but just by, recording that video. So those are the things that you can, do to, add to your own happiness, right? It's not something that you're doing. And I'm not expecting anything in return, but surprisingly, a lot of them actually went back and recorded the video and sent me back just to thank. They did not even, did that just by saying that, thank you for this video, but they went back recording the video themselves and, replying to me on the video. So I think, so these are the smaller things, right? But that adds to your happiness, to your emotional stability, which we are talking about. This has been a great conversation, Eka. So I have got few more questions, which is a kind of I call them the enlightening round. So this is a rapid fire round, okay? So I'm going to ask you some questions. I want you to answer them in a word or maybe in a couple of words, okay? So which one daily habit do you believe has been game changer in your journey?
Meditation, for sure. And the power of the yes.
What is the best piece of advice that you have received in your life?
What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the master calls a butterfly.
Wow. What was the one wrong belief about yourself that you have held for the longest in your life?
That I needed other people to love me and respect me before I loved and respected myself, in order to validate my love and respect for myself.
Wow. What do you want to be remembered for?
Helping you find your purpose, your passion, and helping you become your truest, bestest self.
I'm already envious looking at that big library, that you have. I'm sure it's going to be difficult for you to pick a book or two that has, influenced you personally. But could you share a book or two, that can help our listeners in this journey and the whole thing that we discussed in this episode?
So, okay, let's see if I can narrow it down. The first book, of course, is Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl. It's an unbelievably profound book written in very simple language. So when you think of Holocaust and you think of psychological constructs and the idea of finding a purpose, you think it's a very complicated subject. It's not. So reading Viktor Frankl is refreshing from the point of view of how simple life's view needs to be. And I think it got reflected in the movie called Beautiful Life, was it?
I'm not sure about the movie.
There was a movie about the Holocaust, very similar, but definitely Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. The second book I recommend, again, very, very strongly, is a book by Swami Vivekananda. It's called The Complete Book of Yoga. Again, sounds like a very complex topic, but it's really refreshing and very heartwarming to see the Swami write it so simply and decode yoga as a way of life, as the way you think, the way you do, the way you study, the way you read, the way you love, breaking it down into bhakti and jnana and karma and raja. Very, very heartwarming and very profound. Has had a huge influence on me. The third one is these two sets of books, actually. So there's an author called Fritjof Capra. Fritjof Capra had written The Tao of Physics about 20 years ago. And The Tao of Physics was seminal in the sense that it was a physicist view of philosophy, and he integrated the philosophy of the West with the philosophy of the East with the physics of the West. And very, very interesting book to read if you understand science, which is Tao of Physics. But Fritjof Capra has actually come up with a new book called The Systems View of Life. Why it's fascinating even though it's a slightly difficult book to read, but it's fascinating because he takes on this current view of the world, the narrative of the world we have, which is a very binary, competitive, linear narrative, isolationist, reductionist, mechanistic narrative, to actually saying that there's another way to look at the world, which is the systems view, which is a systemic view, which is a alternate view, which is a more holistic view, which is a view which is not about this is the right path to follow. It's not the view of competition and speed and performance, but the alternative narrative of resilience, of belonging, of sustainability. So, what's the alternative view to the world, and whether we can look at the world systemically instead of looking at it in isolation? So, yeah, and I completely love this book as well. So, the systems view
Awesome.
of life, Fritjof Capra.
All right. So, if you were to start this journey all over again, what are those 3 things that you would have done differently?
When I was 13, so I actually don't believe in regrets, Vijay, and I've never had at any stage, because I truly believe that whatever decision was taken must have been right given those circumstances then. But having said that, things I wish I had done differently. One is definitely embraced my own self. I lost 20 years trying to not be me. And now I'm, of course, making up for lost time, but I wish I'd done that. Having said that, maybe if I'd embraced myself then, I may not have had that kind of value for it then, but I wish I'd done it. That's one. Two is, I really wanted to get into an engineering school, not to become an engineer, but to study science. And I'm spending the rest of my life studying science, but I had the handicap of not having the vocabulary. So I wish I had studied science for sure. That's two. And the third one is that I can't sing to save my life at all. I understand music really well. My sister is a classical singer and a voice artist. I have immense respect for music, but I do wish I could sing. But yeah, those.
So that one, I wish I could. I mean, so that's one of the things that I always kind of thing. I wish I could sing as well. So unfortunately, I can't either. So all right, super, Eka. This has been a great conversation. Before I let you go, I have this one question that I ask to all my guests. And before I ask you that question, if people would like to get in touch with you, learn more about the stuff that you are doing, and find you and basically get in touch with you, what would be the best possible way? Where can they find you?
So given that you know how I struggled with technology, and even setting up systems was a challenge here, sound systems, but we've managed to get some things together. So follow the Ekam, Ekam Resonance page on Facebook, Eka Banerjee face on Facebook, Ekam Resonance page on Instagram. We have our website, ekam.in, EIKAM.in. Right now, still very basic, but you'll see a lot of action happening there in the next 2 months, 3 months, and more. And I really look forward to creating an entire community of people who want to explore themselves, explore scriptures, explore their relationships. Please come, please join us, please be a part of us at Ekam, where we transform lives and help you become your truest, best selves. Thank you, Vijay.
Awesome. I'm sure, after listening to this conversation, people have enough reasons to go and check, you out and all these different places. I'll link that all up on the description of the show. You'll find all the links to get in touch with Eka on the description. All right. So I've got a last question for you, Eka. Now, imagine this. You are standing on the stage, and this one is the largest stadium that has ever been built in the history of the world. And there are millions of people who are eagerly and passionately waiting to listen to you. And you have to share the most important lesson that you have learned in your life. And you have been given only 1 minute of the time to share it. What would be your message?
I think the only message I would really want to give is embrace yourself. Be your own best version. Overcome the fears, the shadows, the insecurities, the narrative that you're given to live with, but step into what your passions, your purpose, your dreams, your desires, your strength, what you really want to do. Because the narrative of competition, speed, and performance is over. you need to belong. You can belong only to your own self. And as long as you're chasing somebody else's narrative or competing with someone else, you're denying yourself your place in the sun. So
Embrace yourself. It has
find
been a
yourself.
great conversation, Eka. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Vijay, for having me over. I've had great fun doing this. And I really hope that your listeners and everybody who's hearing this really steps onto their journey. I'm more than happy to be a part of helping them become their best selves. But I really hope, wish, pray that every one of us becomes our own best version in resonance.
Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Inspiring Talk podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, JioSaavn, or wherever you get your podcast from. I hope you learned something or got some inspiration. You can take a screenshot of this episode and post it on your Instagram story. When you do that, don't forget to tag me @Bijay Speaks. You can access the show notes of this episode by visiting theinspiringtalk.com/9898. Also, don't forget to share how this show is helping you in your personal transformation journey by recording your message at theinspiringtalk.com/speak. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you in the next. Now, go out there and do something inspiring.